Pelosi's nomination comes at a time when Democrats did lose some House seats during the past election. NewsNation's Washington, D.C. correspondent Joe Khalil joins us live now to discuss how the Democratic Party is changing and possibly splitting. And, Joe, I think we all have an idea what that split's about, possibly.
Yeah, publicly, Democratic leaders may not want to acknowledge this, but there certainly are some divisions within the party, and certainly each member has been more forthright about that. You have a more progressive wing of the party, and you have a more moderate wing of the party. And now, as they're looking back and sort of diagnosing why they didn't come close to what they expected on Election Day, both sides are sort of pointing fingers at each other and blaming each other for those lost seats. As returns came in on election night, it became clear the blue wave Democrats were waiting for wasn't coming.
Well, the so-called Democratic message, as the media purported it, did resonate in a lot of congressional districts.
Expecting to gain between 10 and 15 seats, House Democrats lost 8, with more races outstanding, and they fell short of flipping the Senate. Almost immediately, questions arose about why and who was to blame.
People know that I am definitely not a defund police socialist type person.
Democrat Congressman Kurt Schrader from Oregon is one of many moderate members of his party who says rhetoric and messaging from the more progressive members may have cost Democrats seats in the election. Specifically, calls to defund police.
In rural America and parts of suburban America, the message from some of the members of our party is not a winning message.
On a leaked party-wide conference call discussing election results, Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger from Virginia said, quote, "It was a failure. We lost members we shouldn't have lost." She went on, quote, "If we don't mean defund police, we shouldn't say that. We need to not use the word socialist or socialism ever again." In that same call, Spanberger asked her party to pay attention to Republican attack ads like these, with one common theme.
I will oppose socialism.
Sympathizes with Marxists and socialists.
And socialism.
What happened on election night?
Certainly the Trump voter came out, but when you look at where we lost, there are areas that are economically disconnected from the overall economy.
Democrat Eric Swalwell from California says in those areas where Democrats lost seats, it's incumbent on his party to be more direct with voters about what most Democrats do and do not support.
I don't believe in defunding the police. I don't believe in getting rid of ICE. And I actually think that's what most of my colleagues believe in. And
so exactly. Most of your colleagues are not for defunding the police, but the messaging itself seemed to be problematic.
Yeah, and if Americans didn't understand that, then we need to make sure that they do. But I think looking back and fighting over it is not productive. We should learn from it.
But even as Swalwell and others hope infighting stops, perhaps the most well-known progressive in Congress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, tweeted this picture, a glare at moderate Senator Joe Manchin, who tweeted a message opposing defunding police.
Listen, we had a very deep victory 2 years ago.
Uniting the progressives and moderates of the party will fall to Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. Publicly, she put a positive spin on the election results.
We now have a president of our party in the White House, Joe Biden. We have a majority in the House, albeit smaller, the beautiful diversity of our caucus.
But the diversity of her caucus will likely present some challenges when it comes to legislating hot topics like climate change or police reform.
Our diversity is our strength. Our unity is our power.
Time will tell just how united the Speaker can keep her party. And Nancy Pelosi may face a little bit of opposition in her party, but they're largely behind her. She will continue to remain as Speaker. And she said that she spent the weekend after the election calling members who lost and trying to get a sense from them as to why they thought they may have lost, what the conditions were on the ground in those specific races. So they are doing a sort of dive into that, trying to figure out what happened in each race. And by the way, she says in terms of party unity, they're going to begin now looking for COVID relief. And she says that's something her party is united on. Reporting live tonight in Washington, D.C., Joe Khalil, NewsNation.
Joe, thank you very much. And we do want to give you both sides of the story. Republicans are also, of course, looking toward the future. Florida Senator Marco Rubio tweeted this after the election, quote, Florida and the Rio Grande Valley showed the future of the GOP, a party built on a multi-ethnic, multi-racial coalition of working Americans. That tweet referencing President Trump's victory in one Texas county that he actually lost 4 years ago. And joining us now to talk more about the future of the party is RAMESH PONNURU. He is a senior editor of the conservative publication, The National Review, also a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Thank you so much for being with us. We certainly appreciate that. Looking toward the future, but we still, of course, have to get beyond where we are right now, which seems kind of stuck. What is your reaction to the president so far not conceding the race?
Well, it seems like a way of delaying the inevitable. It seems just so impossible that he is going to get the results changed in Pennsylvania, let alone the other states he would additionally need to get changed in order to change this electoral outcome. He lost fair and square, and he either can't acknowledge it to himself or he can't stand to admit it in public. And he is trying to freeze as much of the Republican Party in place and prevent enough of his colleagues from admitting it either.
I think it's probably safe to assume that President Trump will be a very unique ex-president, the type we haven't seen before. What do you think his role will be / should be in the party after January 20th?
Well, there's no question that President Trump is going to be an enormous influence in the Republican Party, but the question of just how much and how he uses it is very much up for grabs. Will he content himself with being a Twitter presence? Will he try to launch a new media company or take over an existing one? These are among the things we just don't know the answer to. I think one thing we can safely say is that he's not going to rule out the possibility of running for 2024, and that means he's going to be a looming presence in Republican presidential politics, whether or not he ultimately decides to run again.
Gotcha. And I have to ask you one more thing. They tell me I'm out of time, but I want to make sure we give equal time to both of these. What do you think Donald Trump's lasting impact on the Republican Party has been or will be as he leaves office?
Well, Trump destroyed the older vision of the Republican Party, this kind of free market above everything politics, but he didn't quite replace it with anything else. And I think Republicans are still grappling with what it's going to mean to be that multiracial working class party that Senator Rubio is looking forward to. That's a hope a lot of Republicans have. It's something that in some ways Trump has advanced, in some ways he hasn't, but it's not a description of where the Republican Party is right now.
All right, RAMESH, thank you so much for being with us. We certainly appreciate your insight. We'll see what the coming months and years bring. Thank you, sir.